By trading for Jrue Holiday, the Boston Celtics have finally done something that their fans have been asking them to do for years, and that, quite frankly, the rest of the league has been pretty scared of over the last few seasons, and that is they have officially gone all in. Now, when I say all in, there's different levels of that, right? I mean, there's what Brooklyn did when they brought in Harden and Kyrie and KD, and they traded away a lot of future firsts to get Harden. There's the level of where Phoenix is at right now, where they quite literally have zero draft compensation, zero salary, zero money, everything. Like, they are literally pushing all the chips to the middle of the table. And then there's where Boston is, where they still have some access to first round picks. They, of course, have assets on their roster. But in terms of where they've been historically over the last decade or so, in terms of being willing to trade future assets to try and capitalize on a championship window, this is as all in as Boston has been in a while, and maybe ever, because we've heard about this team for a decade now, where, you know, they've got Tatum, they've got Brown, they've got different versions of different teams that potentially could win a title, and they were always kind of waiting on their window. It always felt a little bit early for them to trade a lot of stuff. Like, they got Kyrie, those teams were good. They brought in Gordon Hayward, those teams were good when they were healthy, but they never quite traded away future stuff to add the final piece, or looked as aggressive as maybe some other teams would have been, you know, in that situation in terms of where they found themselves in terms of contention. But now they've found their place. They've got Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum on long-term contracts. Both of those guys are now fully in their primes, and this Jrue Holiday trade, in addition to what they did with the entirety of their offseason, to me looks like a team that recognizes that all the conference finals appearances, they made the finals once, all that stuff is cool, but now they're really going for it, and this is the group that they feel like has the best chance of winning a title and bringing a title to Boston this upcoming season. And quite frankly, I agree with them. I had some issues in the past with, you know, maybe the Kristaps Porzingis trade, whether that did or did not make sense in terms of how it fit within, you know, the rest of the bigs on their roster. But now, in the context of bringing in Jrue Holiday and kind of what the rest of the roster looks like, Porzingis is kind of perfect for what they have now. If they can add some more, you know, depth behind him in terms of players in the front court. And then, of course, the Holiday trade. And I mentioned this briefly in the video that went out the day that Holiday got traded, but it's really difficult to imagine a better defensive, you know, perimeter group around the league that you could realistically put together in terms of salaries and all that, of Jrue Holiday, Derek White, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown. Like, those four guys collectively, in terms of versatility, size, ability to get through screens, all around defensive ability, I don't really know how teams are going to score against that, especially if Porzingis is healthy and can provide them some rim protection. And it's crazy to say that, because the 2 years ago when Ime Udoka was there, they had one of the best defenses we'd seen in a decade, in 2 decades, there in Boston when they made their run to the finals. And that was even without a perimeter guard on the level of someone like Jrue Holiday. Obviously, Marcus Smart won Defensive Player of the Year, but Jrue Holiday's better than Marcus Smart. We've talked about this in the previous video. And as a disruptive defender, he's just better even than Smart was, in addition to now some of the other options that they have, whether it be in the front court or obviously Derek White continuing to play better and get more minutes for them. And it's just really interesting the way that they've constructed the roster, where they got Derek White a few years ago. They get Porzingis this offseason. They go and make the final chess piece move to bring in Jrue Holiday, because for years this was a team that wouldn't trade Jaylen Brown for, you know, Paul George, whatever the case may be. They wouldn't trade Jason Tatum for whoever over the years, because they realized that those guys are going to be the foundation of what they do in Boston for the Celtics over the next, you know, decade. And they wanted to keep those guys together. And the previous front office, Danny Ainge, there was a lot of criticism thrown their way in terms of not being willing to go all in, not being as aggressive as their fans thought they should have been, not capitalizing on the championship window. But now, in hindsight, it looks like the right call. It looks like this is, when you look at all those teams they've had over the last 6-7 years, this is the best version of a team that they could have possibly put together. And it's an interesting scenario as well when you think about kind of how they got here, because the only reason they were able to get Holiday is because the Malcolm Brogdon trade didn't work to the Clippers before the draft, where they were going to get some draft compensation. They could have maybe made the salary still work, but it would have been more difficult. And before the Ime Udoka turnaround, this looked like a team that was going in the complete wrong direction. We were really realistically talking about a team that could be splitting up Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum to try and reset some things, and they've fixed that as well. And to go from the frustration of their fans and not going all in, to changing front offices, to changing the roster a couple of times, to the disappointment of the Kyrie and the Gordon Hayward teams, to now, arguably, no disrespect to Denver, Milwaukee, maybe being the best team in the entire league going into this upcoming season on paper. They're at least in the top tier and potentially above, maybe even Denver, Milwaukee. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying there is an argument to be made because of that defensive structure. Now, in terms of concern concerns for Boston, the concerns are similar to other teams that have gone all in. This is as top heavy as Boston has been in a while in terms of their roster construction. They haven't been a super deep team in the postseason over the last couple of seasons, generally playing 7, maybe 8 guys, but there's no more Grant Williams. There's no more Rob Williams. Obviously, Marcus Smart is gone, and the top 6 is really, really good. Holiday, White, Brown, Tatum, Horford, Porzingis. That top 6 is really, really good. Outside of that, the options are relatively limited, especially in the front court, and that's the concern that I'm seeing from a lot of people in terms of this all-in approach. Is the defensive structure on the perimeter is fantastic, but you do still need a big to deal with, whether it be Embiid, whether it be Jokic, and or as a rim protector as well. And Porzingis, despite playing a lot of games last year, and Horford, despite being way more dependable last year than you ever would have expected him to be, both those guys have had issues staying on the floor, and in Al's case, it's been more so an issue of just being older and not being as effective when you really need him to be at certain points, just because it's harder for that guy to recover from game to game because of all the miles he has on his body. And that, to me, there are 2 things that are really going to determine how the Celtics season goes, is their health in the front court and or adding depth to kind of mitigate some of the issues there, which should be pretty easy to add another piece there, as well as how the Brown-Tatum combination looks this season and what they can do to maybe be even better than they were last year or 2 years ago, when they're truly really entering their prime. The vision of this team is very clear. Can those guys be, both first, second team All-NBA caliber players, the way that we know that their talent shows that they can be within this new construction of the team? Can they continue on that path? Now, the other wild card here is, of course, the coaching situation. Joe Mazzulla, by all accounts, was just not a very good first-year head coach. He's very young, still figuring out a lot of things. Obviously, a tough act to follow with Ime Udoka being the guy that he replaced. And I'm definitely concerned about that because they were parts of last year where they looked confused. They didn't look like they knew what was going on, but they did lose, members of the coaching staff during the year, and it was a bit of a weird situation. And I would argue that if there's any roster in the league right now that just in terms of construction, in terms of, lineups that are easy to figure out what's going to work and what isn't, it's the Celtics team. I mean, it's very easy to figure out who the best players are, who the best offensive guys are, how to put a good defensive group out there. And as long as you structure things properly on each end of the floor, this is going to be, without question, one of the best teams in the league this upcoming season. And it's weird how that's happened because, like I said, at the time of the draft, before they made the KP trade, they were going to trade Brogdon for like a pick, I think, maybe not much else, maybe Bones Highland, I can't remember. And then that didn't work out. Then they get KP, and it's like, oh wow, they've really changed things up. They traded away Marcus Smart. And then a week ago, it was like, hey, this is a cool team, but are they going to miss not having Marcus Smart out there? And then Jrue Holiday becomes available, which was never, ever, ever going to be a possibility for them, with the exception of Milwaukee trading for Dame. And there's a part of me that wonders if Milwaukee's looking at this and thinking, like, we're really excited to have Dame, but we didn't account for the fact that Boston, our biggest rival in the East, is going to end up with Jrue Holiday out of this, because there were no upgrades left on the board for Boston that would have made sense for them, that would have upgraded their roster as much as Jrue Holiday in exchange for, in terms of on the floor, Robert Williams and Malcolm Brogdon. I mean, that just wasn't a possibility for them. And Milwaukee kind of created that possibility with the Dame trade. And I cannot wait to see those 2 teams play against each other and see what that looks like. I'm so excited for the season. We're not that far away. And this added wrinkle of Boston not only changing their roster this offseason, but doing it in a way that people have been asking them to, and we've never seen them do. Clearly, there's a ton of belief in the front office with Brad Stevens there that this is the team, this is the group. They have a real window. And yes, they have to deal with Jrue Holiday's free agency potentially in the offseason. Yes, they might have some injury issues in the front court, but every team in the league is going to have question marks going into the season. And Boston, I would argue right now, if those questions get answered correctly, might be the favorites in the entire league.